I find that your intent and actions were sinister and evil. Those acts resulted in the intentional loss of human life in a brutal fashion. There's no excuse. There is not a systemic societal problem that explains or justifies your actions. The court finds, based on the nature and circumstances of this offense, along with the required 25 factors that I am to consider in sentencing a juvenile in the state of Iowa for murder in the first degree, that the defendant, Willard Noble Chaden Miller, should be sentenced to life with the possibility of parole after 35 years.
Case 1. Willard Miller. He seemed like an ordinary teenager growing up in Fairfield, Iowa. Born on July 28, 2004, he was a student at Fairfield High School with dreams of studying abroad. But on November 2, 2021, at just 16 years old, Miller committed an act so brutal it would forever shatter the peaceful community of Fairfield. Nohema Graber, a 66-year-old Spanish teacher, was well loved by her students and colleagues. Every day after school, she took the same afternoon walk through Chautauqua Park. It was her routine, her moment of peace. On this particular day, she never returned home. Later that evening, authorities discovered her body hidden beneath a tarp in the park. She had suffered fatal blunt force trauma to the head. The investigation revealed a motive so petty it seemed incomprehensible. Willard Miller was angry about a bad grade she had given him in her Spanish class. That failing grade threatened his eligibility for a prestigious study abroad program he desperately wanted to attend. In his teenage mind, he saw only one solution. His teacher had to die. Miller didn't act alone. He recruited his classmate Jeremy Goodale to help execute the plan. The two boys studied Graber's routine meticulously, learning exactly when and where she walked each day. Armed with a baseball bat and other supplies, they waited in ambush. When Graber appeared on her usual path, they attacked without mercy, beating her to death. Afterward, they used a wheelbarrow to move her body to a more secluded spot near railroad tracks, covered it with a tarp, and placed the wheelbarrow over it to conceal their horrific crime. The investigation moved quickly, and Miller was arrested shortly after the murder. In April 2023, facing overwhelming evidence, he pleaded guilty to first-degree murder. On July 6, 2023, a judge sentenced him to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 35 years. As of November 2025, Miller has served approximately 3 years of his sentence. His case was appealed to the Iowa Supreme Court, which upheld his life sentence with a 35-year mandatory minimum in October 2024. His co-defendant, Jeremy Goodale, received a life sentence with the possibility of parole after 25 years in November 2023. Goodale also appealed, and in January 2025, the Iowa Court of Appeals affirmed his sentence as well. Both young men will remain behind bars for decades. Miller will be eligible for parole in 2056 when he is 52 years old. Goodale will be eligible in 2046 when he is 41. They will spend the best years of their lives locked away, paying for one moment of senseless violence over a grade. Case 2. Dylann Roof. On the evening of June 17, 2015, a 21-year-old white supremacist named Dylann Roof walked through the doors of Emmanuel African Methodist Episcopal Church in Charleston, South Carolina. This historic black church, a beacon of faith and community, would become the site of one of the most heinous hate crimes in modern American history. Roof arrived during a weekly Bible study session. The 9 parishioners welcomed him warmly, inviting him to sit among them as they discussed scripture and faith. For nearly an hour, he sat silently, listening as these kind souls shared their beliefs in their fellowship. Then, without warning, he rose to his feet, pulled out a handgun, and opened fire on the defenseless congregation. This was no random act of violence. Roof had carefully planned every detail. He chose this church specifically because of its deep roots in the African American community. Among the 9 victims was the church's beloved pastor, Reverend Clementa Pinckney, a state senator who had dedicated his life to serving others. 8 other faithful members fell that night, their lives stolen in an instant of pure hatred. The manhunt ended swiftly. Less than 24 hours after the massacre, authorities captured Roof in Shelby, North Carolina. During his confession, he revealed his twisted reasoning. He hoped the slaughter would ignite a race war across America. Investigators dug deeper into his background and discovered a young man consumed by racist ideology. His online presence was littered with white supremacist manifestos and connections to hate groups. His trial began in late 2016. Choosing to represent himself for portions of the proceedings, Roof showed absolutely no remorse for the 9 innocent lives he'd destroyed. In December 2016, a jury convicted him on all charges: 9 counts of murder, 3 counts of attempted murder, and federal hate crimes. 1 month later, in January 2017, he was sentenced to death. Today, as of November 2025, Dylann Roof remains on federal death row at Terre Haute Federal Prison in Indiana, where he has now spent over 8 years awaiting execution. His case made headlines again in December 2024, when President Biden commuted the sentences of 37 federal death row inmates to life imprisonment. However, Roof was notably excluded from this clemency, along with only 2 others, the Boston Marathon bomber and the Tree of Life synagogue shooter. In April 2025, his attorneys filed a new motion to vacate his death sentence, claiming trial counsel failure and judicial bias. But in August 2025, the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals rejected his appeal, ruling he did not demonstrate a clear right to the relief requested. The death sentence stands, and Roof's fate remains sealed. Case 3. James Fairweather. He was born on August 5, 1998, in Colchester, Essex, England. From an early age, he showed signs of trouble. His childhood was marked by mental health struggles and a disturbing fascination with serial killers and violent crime. What started as a dark obsession would eventually transform into a killing spree that would earn him the horrifying distinction of being one of Britain's youngest serial killers. In 2013 and 2014, Fairweather prowled the streets of Essex, targeting complete strangers. His first victim was 33-year-old James Atfield, who was attacked in March 2014 while resting in Castle Park near his home in Colchester. Fairweather approached Atfield under the pretense of being a friendly stranger. Then, without warning, he launched a savage attack, stabbing Atfield more than 100 times. The brutality was shocking, even to seasoned investigators. 3 months later, on June 17, 2014, Fairweather struck again. This time, his victim was Nahid Almania, a 31-year-old Saudi student studying at the University of Essex. She was walking on Salary Brook Trail near her home when Fairweather ambushed her. He stabbed her 16 times, leaving her body on the path where she'd been enjoying a simple walk. The community was gripped by fear. 2 random murders, seemingly without motive or connection. But Fairweather's reign of terror might have continued indefinitely had it not been for an observant dog walker. On the morning of May 27, 2015, this vigilant citizen spotted a teenager loitering in the early morning hours, wearing rubber-gripped gloves and carrying a knife. Sensing something was wrong, the dog walker called the police immediately. When officers arrived and confronted the suspicious teenager, they discovered it was James Fairweather, and he was in the middle of planning his 3rd murder. During interrogation, Fairweather confessed to both killings. In January 2016, he pleaded guilty to both murders. In April 2016, at just 17 years old, he was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 27 years. He had been only 15 years old when he committed these horrific crimes. Today, in November 2025, James Fairweather is 27 years old. He remains incarcerated serving his life sentence and has served approximately 10 years of his minimum sentence. He will not be eligible for parole consideration until 2043, when he will be 45 years old. There have been no publicly reported updates on his case status or any new appeals. He continues to serve his time in a British prison, a young serial killer who will spend most of his adult life behind bars. Case 4. Morgan Geyser and Anissa Weier. On May 31, 2014, in the quiet suburb of Waukesha, Wisconsin, 12-year-old Morgan Geyser and her friend Anissa Weier invited their classmate Peyton Leutner to a sleepover. The three girls had been friends, sharing typical preteen interests and activities. But what happened the next morning would become one of the most disturbing cases in American criminal history. Geyser and Weier had become dangerously obsessed with Slender Man, a fictional horror character that originated as an internet meme. This tall, faceless figure in a black suit had captured their imaginations to a terrifying degree. They believed Slender Man was real. More than that, they believed he was watching them, judging them. They convinced themselves that if they committed murder, they would prove their loyalty to this imaginary entity and prevent him from harming their families. That morning, they lured Leutner into the woods under the pretense of playing hide-and-seek. Once they were deep enough that no one could hear them, Geyser pulled out a knife. While Weier urged her on, Geyser stabbed their friend Peyton Leutner 19 times. They aimed for her heart, wanting to kill her quickly. Then, believing their friend was dead or dying, they left her bleeding in the forest and walked away. But Peyton Leutner refused to die. Despite her catastrophic injuries, she managed to crawl out of the woods to a nearby road. A passing cyclist discovered her and immediately called for help. She was rushed to the hospital where doctors worked frantically to save her life. Against all odds, she survived. Meanwhile, Geyser and Weier were quickly apprehended. During questioning, they showed little remorse and readily explained their motive. They had to kill to please Slender Man. Given the severity of the crime, both girls were charged with attempted first-degree intentional homicide and tried as adults. In 2017, Morgan Geyser pleaded guilty to the charges. During the trial, it was revealed that she had been diagnosed with schizophrenia, experiencing delusions and hallucinations that made her unable to distinguish reality from fantasy. She was sentenced to 40 years in a mental health institution. Anissa Weier also pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 25 years in a mental health facility. As of November 2025, Morgan Geyser remains in a Wisconsin mental health institution where she has been receiving treatment for schizophrenia and other mental health conditions. She has now served approximately 11 years of her 40-year sentence. Anissa Weier was released from her mental health facility in 2021 after serving 7 years under strict conditions and continued supervision. Peyton Leutner, the remarkable survivor of this attack, has largely stayed out of the public eye, focusing on her recovery and moving forward with her life after the unimaginable trauma inflicted by her former friends. Case 5. Rachel Shoaf and Sheila Eddy. In the summer of 2012, Skyler Neese was a typical 16-year-old girl living in Star City, West Virginia. She had two best friends, Rachel Shoaf and Sheila Eddy. The three were inseparable, sharing everything from secrets to sleepovers. But behind the facade of friendship, darkness was brewing. On July 6, 2012, Skyler snuck out of her house to meet her two best friends for what she thought would be a late-night adventure. Rachel and Sheila picked her up around midnight, and the three girls drove off into the night. Skyler had no idea this would be her last car ride. They drove to a secluded area in Pennsylvania, far from prying eyes. There, in the darkness, Rachel Shoaf and Sheila Eddy turned on their friend. They attacked Skyler with knives, stabbing her repeatedly until she died. Then, in a desperate attempt to hide their crime, they covered her body with branches and debris and drove back home. The next morning, Skyler's parents reported her missing. For months, Rachel and Sheila played the role of concerned friends, participating in search efforts and posting tearful messages on social media begging for Skyler's safe return. They looked everyone in the eye and lied again and again. But in January 2013, the guilt became too much for Rachel Shoaf. She confessed to the murder and led authorities to Skyler's body. The motive, when it finally came out, was as shocking as the crime itself. They killed her because they didn't want to be friends with her anymore. No profound reason, no dramatic confrontation. They simply didn't want her around, so they decided she should die. Rachel Shoaf pleaded guilty to second-degree murder in 2014 and was sentenced to 30 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 10 years. Sheila Eddy was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison, with the possibility of parole after 15 years. As of November 2025, Rachel Shoaf has served approximately 12 years of her sentence and became eligible for parole in 2023. However, she has not been granted parole and remains incarcerated. Sheila Eddy continues to serve her life sentence and will be eligible for parole in 2028. Skyler Neese's parents have become advocates for victims' rights, working to ensure that Rachel and Sheila remain behind bars for as long as possible. They attend every parole hearing, determined that their daughter's killers will not walk free easily. Case 6. McKenzie Sharilla. On July 31, 2022, at 5:30 in the morning, McKenzie Sharilla was driving her Toyota Camry through the quiet streets of Strongsville, Ohio. In the car with her were her boyfriend, 20-year-old Dominic Russo, and their friend, 19-year-old Davian Flanagan. What happened next would shock the nation and spark intense debate about teenage psychology and justice. Surveillance footage captured the entire incident. Shirilla drove down Progress Road at a controlled, normal speed. Then, as she approached a dead-end street, something changed. She accelerated rapidly, speeding up to 100 miles per hour. She drove straight toward a brick building, never hitting the brakes, never swerving. She slammed into the wall with devastating force. Both Dominic and Davian died on impact. Shirilla survived, though seriously injured. When investigators reviewed the surveillance footage, they were stunned. This was no accident. The video showed Shirilla deliberately accelerating and aiming for that wall. Judge Nancy Margaret Russo would later describe it in chilling terms. She morphs from a responsible driver to literal hell on wheels as she makes her way down the street. She had a mission, and she executed it with precision. Shirilla was arrested and charged with 12 felony counts, including 2 counts of murder, aggravated vehicular homicide, and drug possession. Investigators found psilocybin mushrooms and a digital scale in the wreckage, raising questions about her state of mind that night. In August 2023, after a bench trial, Judge Russo found Shirilla guilty on all charges. The judge cited evidence showing Shirilla's relationship with Dominic had been toxic and volatile. Prosecutors argued this was a premeditated murder-suicide attempt, where Shirilla intended to kill all 3 of them but survived. Shirilla was sentenced to 2 concurrent life sentences with the possibility of parole after 15 years, meaning she will be eligible for parole in 2038. But the case hasn't ended there. As of November 2025, Shirilla, now 20 years old, continues to fight her conviction from behind bars at the Ohio Reformatory for Women in Marysville. In September 2024, her initial appeal was denied by the appellate court. In February 2025, her legal team filed for appeal in the Ohio Supreme Court, but in April 2025, the court declined to hear the case. In early 2025, her new defense team filed a supplemental post-conviction relief petition, presenting new medical evidence. They submitted an affidavit from a university hospital's neurologist who reviewed Shirilla's post-crash medical data and concluded the evidence was consistent with loss of consciousness at the time of the crash, suggesting she may have suffered a seizure. However, this motion was denied in May 2025, with Judge Russo ruling it was filed too late for the court to consider. Her parents, Steve and Natalie Shirilla, broke their silence in May 2025, giving their first public interviews since their daughter's conviction. They insist McKenzie is innocent and that the justice system has failed their family. "Show me one piece of evidence that says she did this on purpose," Steve Shirilla pleaded. "Then she's right where she belongs." But there isn't any. Today, McKenzie Sharilla has served approximately 3 years of her sentence. She spends her time painting and keeping a journal, writing on every page, "The truth will set me free." Her family maintains daily contact through text messages and phone calls. Her first parole hearing is scheduled for September 2037. She will be 32 years old. Case 7. Dexter Darnell Johnson. In June 2006, just days after his 18th birthday, Dexter Darnell Johnson embarked on what Harris County prosecutors would call a 25-day crime spree that left 5 people dead. On June 18, 2006, Johnson and 4 accomplices were driving through Houston looking for someone to rob. They found Maria Aparice, 23, and Hui No, 17, sitting in Aparice's Toyota outside Ngo's house. Johnson approached the car with a shotgun, threatening to shoot Maria if she didn't cooperate. The terrified couple complied as Johnson and his accomplices forced them into the car. What followed was a horrifying joyride around Houston, with the accomplices following in a separate vehicle. Eventually, they drove to a secluded area. There, Johnson raped Maria Aparice in the back seat, while the others forced Ngo to listen to his girlfriend's assault. Then, according to trial testimony, Johnson and another accomplice shot both victims, killing them. Johnson has consistently maintained he didn't fire the fatal shots, though he admits to being present during the murders. In June 2007, Johnson was convicted of capital murder and sentenced to death. He was sentenced to die for crimes committed when he was barely an adult, crimes that prosecutors linked to a broader pattern of violence. But Johnson's case has become one of the most complicated on Texas death row. His lawyers have argued for years that he is intellectually disabled and therefore ineligible for the death penalty under U.S. Supreme Court precedent. Johnson is a high school dropout diagnosed with schizophrenia. Multiple evaluations have placed his IQ around 70, the threshold generally considered indicative of intellectual disability. Brain damage and cognitive impairments have been documented. His lawyers describe him as functioning at the level of a 10-year-old. Johnson has been scheduled for execution multiple times. Each time, federal courts have intervened at the last minute. In April 2019, he received a stay just 2 days before his scheduled execution due to concerns about his legal representation. In August 2019, he received another stay less than 24 hours before his execution, with the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals sending his case back to examine his intellectual disability claims. As of November 2025, Dexter Darnell Johnson, now 37 years old, remains on death row in Texas, where he has been for over 18 years. His case continues to wind through federal courts as judges grapple with questions about intellectual disability, brain damage, and whether executing someone with his cognitive limitations would violate the Constitution. No new execution date has been set. His fate remains uncertain. Case 8. Frenita Torres. In October 2018, in Gwinnett County, Georgia, 3 teenagers made a plan that would destroy multiple lives. Frenita Torres, 17, along with Nicholas Evans, 17, and Khalil Miller, 18, plotted to rob someone. Their target was 21-year-old William Tunchez. The trio lured Tunchez with a promise. Torres would meet him for an intimate encounter. What Tunchez didn't know was that it was all a setup. The teenagers planned to rob him during the meeting. When they met, Evans pulled out a gun. During the robbery, Evans shot Tunchez, killing him. Torres then stole his phone as the 3 fled the scene. All 3 were arrested and charged with felony murder and armed robbery. Because someone died during the commission of a felony they committed, all 3 were held equally responsible under Georgia law, even though only Evans pulled the trigger. As of November 2025, the legal proceedings remain ongoing. Specific details regarding their convictions and sentences have not been made publicly available. The case illustrates the harsh reality of felony murder laws. All participants in a crime that results in death can face murder charges, regardless of who actually caused the death. Case 9. Gregory Ramos. Gregory was born in 2002 in DeBary, Florida. By all accounts, he was a typical teenager struggling with the usual challenges: school, grades, parental expectations. On November 2, 2018, when he was just 15 years old, an argument with his mother would escalate into an unthinkable tragedy. Ramos was failing in school. His grades were poor, and his mother, Gail Clevenger, confronted him about his academic performance. What started as a typical parent-child argument spiraled out of control. In a moment of rage, Ramos attacked his mother. He strangled her to death in their home. Panicking after realizing what he had done, Ramos called 2 of his friends, Brian Porras and Jacob Siegler, asking for help. Rather than calling authorities, the 2 friends agreed to help Ramos cover up the crime. The 3 teenagers wrapped Clevenger's body and buried her in a nearby church cemetery. Then, in a chilling display of calculation, they staged a burglary at Ramos's home to mislead investigators into thinking his mother had been killed during a robbery. The deception didn't last long. Investigators quickly saw through the staged burglary scene. All 3 boys were arrested. During interrogation, Ramos confessed to killing his mother. In December 2021, Gregory Ramos pleaded guilty to first-degree murder, abuse of a dead body, and tampering with evidence. He was sentenced to 45 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after serving 25 years. His 2 friends received lesser sentences for their roles in covering up the crime. As of November 2025, Gregory Ramos has served approximately 6 years of his sentence. He is incarcerated in a Florida prison, where he will remain until at least 2043, when he will be eligible for parole at age 41. He will spend his entire young adulthood behind bars, living with the knowledge that he killed the woman who gave him life over an argument about grades. Case 10. Alec McKinney. On May 7th, 2019, at the STEM School Highlands Ranch in Douglas County, Colorado, 2 students walked into their school with firearms and opened fire on their classmates. Alec McKinney, 16, and his accomplice Devin Erickson, 18, had planned the attack together, seeking notoriety and revenge. The shooting resulted in the death of 18-year-old Kendrick Castillo, a brave student who died trying to stop the shooters. 8 others were injured before the attack was stopped. Investigators later discovered that McKinney had been struggling with severe mental health issues and was driven by a desire for fame through violence. Both McKinney and Erickson were arrested at the scene. Because of the severity of the crime, McKinney, though a minor, was tried as an adult. His trial began in 2020. In 2021, McKinney was convicted and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As of November 2025, Alec McKinney has served approximately 6 years of his life sentence. He remains incarcerated in Colorado, where he will spend the rest of his life behind bars. There is no possibility of parole, no chance of freedom. At 16 years old, he made a choice that ended one life, injured 8 others, and destroyed his own future. His accomplice, Devin Erickson, also received a life sentence for his role in the attack. Case 11. Michael Shane Bargo. In April 2011, in Summerfield, Florida, a group of teenagers committed one of the most gruesome murders in the state's history. Michael Shane Bargo, 18 years old, orchestrated the torture and murder of 15-year-old Seth Jackson. Jackson had been in an on-and-off relationship with one of Bargo's acquaintances. Jealousy and hatred festered until Bargo decided Jackson needed to die. Along with several accomplices, Bargo lured Jackson to a house under false pretenses. Once Jackson arrived, they attacked him. They beat him savagely, then shot him. But the horror didn't end there. After killing Jackson, they dragged his body to a bathtub. There, they dismembered him in an attempt to dispose of the evidence. Finally, they tried to burn the remains to cover up their crime. The level of brutality shocked even seasoned investigators. When Jackson's body was discovered, authorities quickly pieced together what had happened. Bargo was arrested, along with his accomplices. During interrogation, Bargo showed no remorse. His confession was cold and emotionless, as if he felt nothing for the life he had taken. The jury had no difficulty reaching a verdict. In 2014, Michael Shane Bargo was convicted of first-degree murder. Given the premeditated nature of the crime and the extreme brutality, he was sentenced to death. At 18, Bargo became one of the youngest people on Florida's death row. As of November 2025, Michael Shane Bargo has been on death row for approximately 13 years. He remains incarcerated in Florida, awaiting his execution. No execution date has been set, as his case continues through the appeals process. He has spent his entire adult life in a cell, waiting to die for a murder he committed as a teenager, driven by jealousy. Case 12. Alyssa Bustamante. On October 21, 2009, 15-year-old Alyssa Bustamante wrote in her diary about something she desperately wanted to do: kill someone. She had been planning it for weeks, fantasizing about what it would feel like to take a life. That evening, she found her opportunity. Her neighbor, 9-year-old Elizabeth Olton, was playing outside near their homes in a small Missouri town. Alyssa approached Elizabeth and asked if she wanted to go for a walk in the woods. The little girl, trusting her older neighbor, agreed. Once they were deep in the forest where no one could hear them, Alyssa turned on Elizabeth. She strangled the 9-year-old with a shoelace, then stabbed her multiple times. After Elizabeth was dead, Alyssa dragged her small body to a shallow grave she had dug earlier. She buried Alyssa, covered the grave with leaves and dirt, and then calmly walked home. That evening, Alyssa seemed completely normal. She showed no signs of distress, no hint of the horror she had just committed. In fact, she was so unfazed that she texted a friend shortly after the murder, admitting what she had done. When the friend contacted authorities, police immediately went to question Alyssa. At first, she denied everything, but the evidence was overwhelming, and eventually she confessed. When asked why she had killed Elizabeth, her answer was chilling. She wanted to know what it felt like. Police discovered Alyssa's journals, which contained disturbing writings about her desire to kill. She had written detailed plans about how she would commit the murder. Her diary entries revealed a deeply troubled teenager who had been thinking about murder for weeks before carrying it out. Alyssa Bustamante was arrested and charged with second-degree murder. Given her age, she was tried as a juvenile. The jury convicted her, and she was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 35 years. As of November 2025, Alyssa Bustamante, now 31 years old, has served approximately 16 years of her sentence. She remains incarcerated in Missouri, where she will stay until at least 2044, when she will be eligible for parole at age 50. Elizabeth Alton would have been 25 years old today. Instead, she's forever frozen at 9 years old. A little girl who trusted the wrong person and paid with her life. Thank you for watching Crime Lens. Please remember to honor the victims, support their families, and never forget the real human cost of these terrible crimes.